on timer. That's great. Okay, let's see if this works. No, it works. Now I just showed you my next slide. I hope you don't. Hold on, let me get my notes. And my timer. Okay, this is nifty. If you guys haven't used Keynote, this is awesome. Okay, welcome to the class, to your class. There's a lot of familiar faces, and I kind of feel like this could be like an awkward thing. I don't know if it's good or bad, because I'm going to have to introduce myself so that everyone who listens knows, but you're going to be like, I know who you are. So bear with me. Anyway, this is Practical Programming, a Zero to Hero class on becoming a developer. You don't need to know anything up front. I'm going to teach you everything, so don't worry. Anyway, Zero to Hero, I don't know, you guys already saw this, but this is from Wild America, which is actually probably going to like show me as a millennial, but I love this movie, and I just remember being like one of the big things with this guy being like completely nothing, and then all of a sudden he's like the hero, his brothers love him and everything, and then he goes back to nothing. But hopefully we'll stop before you go back to nothing, and you'll be great. So some of you guys may be thinking, who are you and how do you know that you can teach me? Because I'm unteachable. I've tried on Codecademy or whatever. And this is, unfortunately, where I tell you that I have absolutely no clue what I'm doing, as you saw today with this setup. So bear with me. And there's actually kind of a funny thing that's hard to explain in slides. But a lot of people misspell bear, not like B-A-R, but B-A-R-E when they say bear with me. And you should look it up because it has a really funny meaning. So anyway, really about me, I'm Jed Stevenson. I've been programming since I was 12, which isn't really like that much of an accomplishment, just like kind of some background on me that I've been developing for a long time. And some of my creations, one that I'm most proud of, AskJed.com, a little shameless self-promotion, but it gets, I wrote it in high school in like 2007. It gets like 20,000 people a month who visit it, which is kind of, it's not that many people in internet world, but in real people world, that's kind of a lot of people. And it cost me $10 a year to run, and it makes something like $10,000 a year through one little ad. The power of Google AdWords. In 2011, after I graduated, I moved to New York and worked for a company called Supply, with a V.com. And I got a taste of kind of the startup culture, really enjoyed it, and it was really amazing how much being around, I think if working at Supply, what it taught me was like how much you can advance just by being around people who know what they're doing. So hopefully you guys will advance by being around me, kind of. But anyway, in 2012 we were acquired by eBay, which eBay didn't really look like that. And I actually realized that you really can't see the... Yeah, it's better. I can't say that I had really anything to do with that. But I left eBay in May of 2013 and am working on a new project called Mattress, which is a way to store your Bitcoins online and safely on your person. Still working on the copy, that may or may not be it, but one great thing is that my co-founder is taking the class, and he's hoping one day to touch the code. Which may or may not happen, we'll see. So why am I teaching this class? A lot of people ask me, why aren't you charging? You know, why is this class free? Why would you want to teach a bunch of people how to program? But mostly that's answered by programming being awesome. It's a great feeling to be able to program, and sharing that with other people is also a great feeling. It requires zero cash, so pretty much everything that you do, except, I mean, your laptop costs money, but you can probably get by with, there's a lot of freely available tools that you won't even need to have your own computer, and all the tool chains, the programming languages, a lot of the, and most, if not all of the tools that we'd use are completely free. Even the hosting for a lot of services, free. So there's really nothing stopping you other than yourself. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is this notion of humans as makers, and how we need to stop consuming 24/7 and start actually building things and making things. And one of the things that I've thought about is how often I come home and I just sit on the couch and watch ESPN. And some of you may watch E, some of you may do other things, read blogs, I don't know. But at the end of the day, you think to yourself, like, man, I've been Pinteresting for 3 hours, and what have I got to show for myself? And I feel the same way about watching TV or anything. Like, these people who are making the content are the people that I'm interacting with, but I'm not in that equation anymore. There's no one knows who I am. I'm just the consumer. So hopefully with this skill set, you'll be able to take what you learn and apply it and build things and kind of make your little mark on the big internet. The other thing is commanding an audience. There's something like 3 billion people who are on the internet. It's a lot of people. And Ask Judd gets 20,000 views a month. Like, it's so easy to command an audience, build something that people see and that people love, and keep them coming back for more. Because I think everyone's kind of hungry for great stuff, and we're all kind of trained to consume. So hopefully you'll be able to be a maker. And if you think it, you can build it, which kind of goes on to the next slide of all of these. I don't know, I guess you can kind of tell. But Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, like all of these companies that are these massive, massive companies, they could all essentially be built for pennies today. Really the only thing that's required is your time. And if you're the one doing the development, you're not paying someone to do it. Obviously these companies, they're massive, and so they're not run for pennies anymore. But if you wanted to, say, build a Facebook for your like very niche segment of, who knows what, wedding flower people, then hey, there you are. And you could host that for free and basically make it yourself for free. So why are you here? I think everyone is probably taking this class for a little bit different reason. And I don't really even like calling it a class. Kind of like, I don't know, I guess that's the best word for it, since I'm up here talking and you guys are kind of listening. But anyway, hopefully it becomes more of like a mentorship thing. But whether you're here to learn a new skill, or to build a project that you've been dreaming about, or change your career, or whether you just have tons of free time on Tuesdays and Thursdays and want to spend it here, that's totally fine. You're in the right place. And I hope that everyone is excited. So enough rambling, and let's talk about it. My highest priority in this whole thing is to keep your head in the game. Because it's boring for me to get up, and if I had a whiteboard, I could draw on a whiteboard, and you guys could like throw paper airplanes at me behind my back and stuff. But bored people don't learn, and I don't think that there's anything inherently boring about programming. The most boring thing that we'll probably do is this class, where I just tell you what we're going to be doing, which is really boring. But if you're ever bored, let me know. Because, we can spice it up a little bit. I don't know what we can do, but we can do some different things. So class structure, I think I sent an email, so some of you guys may or may not know, but there's 2 classes per week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9:30. It's a little late, but it's also a good time for people who have jobs and get work late, like most New Yorkers do. Tuesdays are going to be light and airy and refreshing, bite-sized, kind of like this lemon mousse, which was the first hit on Google Images for light and airy. And Thursdays are going to be more advanced concepts. So there's going to be homework or apartment work. And I know that at the sound of homework, a lot of you were kind of freaking out. So freak out and panic. I stole that from the Yahoo acquisition of Tumblr. I hope they don't mind. So this homework, these assignments, are they graded? I think the best answer to that is no. But there's a thought experiment here that we're going to travel down. Do you have to do it? No. You don't have to do it. Do I have to come to class? No. There's really like nothing about this that is required, and I want everything to be as loose as possible. After the classes are done, I'm going to be posting them online. So if I come Thursday and the room is empty, I guess I wouldn't be that surprised, but I'm going to have to pretend like there are people here. So it's not awkward. Someone actually did that on an iTunes U course. They messed up. So then they had to reshoot it and pretend like there was a class. So I hope I don't have to do that. The final thought is, do I have to take the class? And the answer is no. Even if you think it would hurt my feelings for you to leave and never come back, which it really would, and the room would get smaller, you really don't have to take the class. I don't want to force anyone to do anything they don't want to. But I came up with a little equation that seemed really great at the time that I was making the slides. And now that I'm here, it may or may not be that great. So we'll see. But it's e squared plus the square root of t equals k, where e is effort and t is the teacher and k is knowledge. So really the point is that the effort that you put in is going to exponentially affect how much knowledge you get. And the teacher has very little meaning in this equation. Then it had a good little programming thing of inputs affect outputs. So this is kind of your first programming lesson that you'll start seeing that things that you put into functions and stuff will affect what you get out. And I know you're thinking that we get it, really want to move along. So what are we going to learn? So this is where we kind of dive into what's actually going to be covered. HTML, which is hypertext markup language. I should have had one of you guys tell me what you thought it meant. The simplest way to describe it is as the building block of the web. Pretty much any page that you interact with, anything that you interact with online is HTML. HTML I wouldn't really say is a programming language. It's a markup language. It's how you give documents meaning it's how you give documents meaning to computer programs. So when you type in facebook.com, Facebook server generates some HTML, sends it back to your web browser, and it's interpreted. And there are lots of tags, and tags can have different things like attributes. And these things all form together kind of like this. This was kind of the best image description that I could find. But if you'll look at this slide, you'll see that you may go to like the Facebook sign-up page and you think it's just this flat rendering and that's all there is to it. But if you look, you can see how contained different things are and how there's actually a lot of little pieces that on first glance you probably wouldn't have noticed. But that's HTML. HTML tells the browser that this button is clickable, that the sign-up button is clickable, that the login button is clickable, that the text boxes are where you would enter your name or your password, and that's HTML. It's not really programming, it's just a way to give meaning to a document that otherwise would be pretty boring. And CSS, does anyone know what CSS stands for? I'm going to quiz everyone. Tyler, what do you think it means?
Cascading style sheet.
Nice. All right, so CSS is cascading style sheets. CSS is a way to present HTML. So on its own, HTML has some default renderings with the browsers, but mostly it's pretty boring. I don't know if, let's see, yeah. So we go to this, I skipped ahead a little bit, but this is Facebook without CSS, and this may even have a little CSS, but you'll see that it really doesn't. I'm sure in the old days when the internet was first created and we had these old browsers wandering around, people wrote documents that were a little bit more self-describing, but now we don't really do that. which is bad. Facebook really should be better about this. But you'll see that the page has relatively little styling and is actually pretty confusing. So CSS is a way to kind of go past some of the default styles that HTML documents have and to make things look nice. So if you've been wanting to make a blog, a lot of the blog stuff is really just CSS. They have a lot, there's themes, things like WordPress, they have themes. Tumblr, they all come with pretty pre-canned themes. And you can customize the CSS to make it look how you want it to look. JavaScript. So we're going to be covering JavaScript, which some people are kind of like, well, I want to cover JavaScript. Some people say stay away from JavaScript. JavaScript is kind of an interesting beast. It's not really something that you would use server-side, so you wouldn't use it to write the majority of your application or whatever it is that you want it to make. You could, and people do it, and there's techniques to do that, but it's not really, for a beginner at least, it's kind of a hard beast to tame. But what JavaScript does give us, and with the power of jQuery, is some really simple and easy ways to add nice interactions to HTML and CSS. So for instance, if you wanted to make sure that a user had filled out a form before they submitted it, and that way the page didn't have to refresh and all of that, then you would insert a little JavaScript and you'd be able to say, oh hey, you have to fill in your first name. There are ways to use JavaScript as like your main language. And JavaScript is a programming language, whereas CSS and HTML are not really languages. But we're not going to cover using JavaScript as your main general purpose language. We're going to be using it mostly with jQuery, which is a JavaScript library, and it kind of abstracts a lot of the crazy stuff with JavaScript and the browsers, and lets you just focus on getting what you want done. So with that, the main language that we're going to be covering is Ruby, and Ruby is going to be the general purpose language that we use for this course. Ruby is an eloquent language. It's kind of easy to understand. It reads a lot like the English language, so it's kind of easy to understand in your mind what's happening in your programs. Whereas some other languages are probably a little bit more computer sciencey. But if you're not very familiar with computer science concepts, then you may or may not be as able to understand them as with another language like Ruby. And I think that I'm trying to figure out if I want to dive into this or not. One thing you may think, and I'll get back to this, but are we learning the right things? And with that, my main thought around that is that Facebook was built with PHP, which is another language. Instagram was built with Python, which is another language. And Twitter was built with Ruby until they got really big, and then they basically rebuilt it with something else. And the main point is that it's not the tools. It's just being able to create what you want to create. It's actually a really good problem to have to rewrite everything because you have 100 million users, and it was, Ruby was really great when you had 10, but not 100 million. And some people would say that if you built it right the first time in Ruby, you could still be using Ruby. But anyway, I want to dive back into Ruby a little bit further. So Ruby is what's going to be our general purpose language. It's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, and almost anything that you can think of, any web product that's of any kind of complexity, it uses a general purpose language on the back end. So when you think about how the web pages are rendered and how it all kind of fits together, basically you say, I want to go to google.com, you go to, there's a request that's made to Google server, and Google in whatever general purpose language they're using, which they use a few. They look you up and they say, oh, hey, it's you, user number 2, you're back. Let's go ahead and make something that's personalized for you. So in the general purpose language that they chose, which for us would be Ruby, they generate some HTML, they spit the HTML out, and it's shown on the page. So that's kind of how Ruby fits in. There's a lot of heavy lifting done by Ruby. The HTML is used to simply mark up the information that you're sending back. CSS is applied on top of the HTML, and that's how you're going to give that document a presentation layer so that it doesn't look terrible. And then extra interactions are going to be made with JavaScript. So you can substitute any of those components, and I think most of this class is going to be able to be applied to any language. You'd be surprised how much each language is the same. There's a lot of like back and forth in different communities about how everything is different. Like, why would you learn this? Why would you learn that? But in general, you should be able, if you have any kind of understanding of any general purpose language, you should be able to go between any of them. So if you all of a sudden decided that you really wanted, we're learning Ruby in here, but you really wanted to, build something at work and you guys use Python at work, then I think you'd be able to transition in between either of those pretty fine. But kind of getting into the mindset of this class, some people may be thinking, is 2 times a week for 60 minutes all that I really need? And right now I'm kind of thinking that this will be a lot less than 60 minutes, but the other classes will be long, I assure you. But it goes back to my equation, which was a great equation. But you're only going to get in you're only going to get out what you put in. And hopefully you'll be inspired to learn outside of class. I tend to find that whenever you're building something and making something, you look down, you look up, and all of a sudden it's dark outside and you don't know where the day went. Emily can attest to this a little bit because I'll be like chatting and be like, oh my goodness, it's like 5 o'clock and I didn't eat lunch. What happened to the day? And I think that making something is it's a great feeling. And I hope that I'm able to give you guys at least a little piece of that feeling. And it's not going to be so much about like, oh, I can't believe I have to go to class, or oh my goodness, I can't believe I have to build this thing I'm not interested in. Hopefully everything that we do in here can be applied to something that you're interested in, and then you guys will have that feeling. Anyway, so practicalprogramming.org is the website that I set up. It's a little blog, it's a little Tumblr blog. The basic premise is that it's going to be where I post some interesting things. You can think of it as Frommer's Guide to Programming, or something like that. But anyway, it's going to be where I post like links to articles, the videos of the slides, and audio is going to be posted, and tips to help you with your assignments. Plus, I'm going to be getting and putting up some reading for the next session. So if we're going to cover something that's a little more complex and you want to be ahead, or you want to understand what I'm saying the first time I say it, and then be able to listen for deeper stuff, I'll be posting some readings beforehand, and you'll be able to read those and come in and teach me about what I'm going to teach. So I know no one is thinking, I can't wait to fill my free time with homework, because that was said by no one, ever. But the good news is that it won't feel like work. It's going to feel like you're just doing something that's awesome. And, but hopefully, today's class, I actually feel terrible that it was short, but hopefully you've had a chance to digest everything, And since today is a Tuesday, it's light and airy, but all other Tuesdays will be 60 minutes, I promise. But I have a very light assignment for everyone who's interested. But I want you to try and think of something that you want to build, something where this can be applied. Mostly, I don't think it's a very good way to learn if you're just learning for the academics of it all. I like to be pragmatic and, let's learn what I have to learn to build what I want to build. And I think this course is going to be kind of like that. So hopefully, think of something that you want to build, tweet or email me. And then that way I can make sure that everything that I'm teaching is worthwhile. Because what I don't want to do is, I don't want to really dive into topics, something that I think is interesting, if no one in this room wants to do anything like that. So if you guys want to build something, if a lot of people want to build something that uses a database backend, then we'll dive into that a little bit more than we otherwise would have. If everyone's kind of interested in, well, I want to make a Spotify clone, then we'll dive into, how do we handle audio in HTML a little bit better than we otherwise would. So I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be a little interaction. There's going to be a little interaction next class too. Okay. So anyway, does anyone have any questions? I had a feeling you guys wouldn't have any questions.
Well, I know that it connects off something.
Oh, that's fine.
But I don't know what jQuery is.
Okay.
But,
So the question is, what is jQuery? And sorry, I have to repeat the questions, but I bet no one else can hear you on my mic. jQuery is a JavaScript framework that takes away a lot of the complicated, less beautiful things about JavaScript. So you can kind of think of it as a common base layer to work with, instead of having to go and do lower level stuff. Does that make sense?
Can you talk a little bit more about frameworks in general?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about frameworks.
It's like what the purpose of them are. Do they extend beyond JavaScript?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, frameworks in general are some of the best frameworks have come from developers doing the same thing over and over again. So there's a saying that the best developers are lazy developers, and the reason is that I'm actually pretty lazy. I'm not a good developer, but I'm pretty lazy. I'm an okay developer. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so if I'm constantly having to do something over and over, the chances are that I'm probably just not going to do it, or I'm going to find a way to automate it. So frameworks are kind of a growth from that, in that developers, for instance, Rails. There's a framework called Rails, and it is a Ruby framework, so we're going to definitely touch on it. But basically, the Rails developers all it was a company, and they were building websites for different people, and they all kind of noticed that each website had a lot of components that were reused. So they started saying, well, instead of having to rewrite this every single time, let's make something that's a very common layer that we can use for all of these websites. So there's different kinds of common components. Some of it is like form handling. So if you want to have a sign-up form, Rails has code that makes that very simple. If you want to access a database, Rails has code that makes that very simple. So with that said, frameworks give you as a developer a lot of tools right off the bat, and something that a lot of other developers use quite a bit. Now, for you guys, frameworks are not necessarily the best way to learn how to program. mainly because in the same way that seasoned developers get tired of doing all of this stuff over and over again, you've never done it once. So hiding that from you doesn't necessarily teach you anything, and if anything, it kind of makes it, it's a weird feeling when you don't know what's going on, and that's not a good feeling. And I think if you dive into frameworks too quickly, you'll be confused why things are happening and not really understand what's going on. So with that said, I'm going to try to hold off of showing you any frameworks for a good while until everyone feels like they have a grasp on the concepts that are being hidden from you. Anything else? APIs? Yeah, I think APIs are definitely something that we can talk about. I love APIs. It's like poetry. Love it. It's hard work. There's nothing like a great API. For those of you who don't know, APIs are API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's a way for two applications to talk to each other over kind of a common messaging layer. So when you get on Facebook for your phone, it's actually talking to Facebook's servers wherever they host them. So anyway, that's accomplished through an API. When you get on Twitter on your phone is talking to Twitter's API servers. When you get on Supply on your phone, we built the app with our API, so you can use that too. And we'll definitely talk about it. It's something that's actually kind of a lot of like new web products all have APIs, so something that we'll definitely dive into.
What about, it might be too advanced or maybe not at all, but machine learning?
Machine learning is it's an area that I haven't really done a lot of in-depth work in, but is really interesting. So if anyone is interested in that, I may not cover that during the 60 minutes of class time, but if you have a project that you're willing to work on, I can definitely give some guidance and tips as to how to get started on that. And there's Python is actually a really great language for machine learning. There's a lot of libraries that are written for Python and machine learning that kind of make it simple. Ruby is building out its machine learning stuff because one of the great things about Ruby is that it can actually, you can have language extensions that use native components so you can get the speed that you need for something like machine learning. So yeah, there's tools in every language. But if you have an interest in that, then we can talk afterwards. Anything else? Man, you guys are so attentive. Okay, that's it. Thursday at 9:30. That's when the next class will be.